Accounting 12 Conceptual Framework and Accounting Standards. Conceptual Framework Lecture 1. The following are the learning objectives. At the end of these topics, the student should be able to describe the structure of accounting standard setting organization, identify users of financial statements, define conceptual framework, state the purpose of the conceptual framework, identify the scope of the conceptual framework, discuss the qualitative characteristics of financial statements, state the elements of financial statements, explain the recognition principle, identify the measurement basis of financial elements, and discuss the concept of capital. The conceptual framework sets out the concepts that underlie the preparation and presentation of financial statements for external users. These concepts are general in nature. So, etong conceptual framework, ito yung general guidelines ng nagpre-prepare ng financial statement ng isang kumpanya. So, the framework sets out the following. Number 1, the objective of general purpose financial reporting. Number 2, the qualitative characteristics of useful financial information. Number 3, a description of reporting entity and its boundary. Number 4, the definition of an asset, a liability, equity, income, and expenses na madadiscuss natin later on. Number 5, recognition and the recognition criteria. Number 6, measurement basis and when to use them. Number 7, concepts and guidance on presentation and disclosure. And number 8, concepts of capital and maintenance of capital. So we have the following purposes of conceptual framework. The conceptual framework is used by the IASB or the FRSC. Ano yung IASB? It is the International Accounting Standard Board. The FRSC stands for the Financial Reporting Standard Committee. So, the IASB and the FRSC, ito yung gumagawa ng accounting standards. Ginagamit nila yung conceptual framework to assess them in the development and revision of the IFRS and the PFRS. The IFRS and the PFRS, ito yung accounting standards based on consistent concepts resulting in financial information that is useful to investors, lenders, and other creditors. And at the same time, etong conceptual framework ginagamit din ng preparers of financial statement. Sino nagpre-prepare ng financial statements? Yung accountant ni company or yung bookkeeper ni company. So, the conceptual framework is used to assist preparers of financial reports to develop consistent accounting policies for transactions or other events. And also to auditors. It assesses the auditors in forming an opinion as to whether financial statements comply with the PFRS or IFRS. These are the accounting standards. PFRS stands for Philippine Financial Reporting Standards or International Financial Reporting Standards. So, si auditors, lalo na yung mga external auditors, nagbibigay sila ng opinion dun sa financial statement na prepare ng management or ng company. So, ina-audit nila and they will give an opinion as to whether the financial statements comply with the standard. Ginagamit ni auditor si conceptual framework as a guideline para sa pag-audit niya dun sa financial statements ng client niya. Also for the users of financial statements. Since the conceptual framework is a guideline, so therefore, ginagamit siya ng users of financial statement to understand and interpret standards. So, sino yung mga users ng financial statements? Mamaya, i-discuss natin sino yung mga users ng financial statements. and also to those who are interested in the work of FRSC and the IASB. So it will provide them with information about each approach to the formulation of PFRS and the IFRS. Status of the framework. In the absence of a standard or an interpretation that specifically applies to a transaction, management must use judgment in developing and applying accounting policy that results in information that is relevant and reliable. Note that conceptual framework is not a standard and does not override any specific IFRS or PFRS. So, pag may pinagkaiba ngayon si conceptual framework and accounting standard, hindi pwede na mag-prevail si conceptual framework because conceptual framework is not an accounting standard. Guideline lang si conceptual framework. Eh ngayon, paano kung yung transaction walang applicable na standard sa kanya? So, management must use judgment and developing and applying accounting policy. Pero, in using judgment, ginagamit ni preparers of financial statements yung conceptual framework. The conceptual framework sets out the objective of financial reporting. So the objective of financial reporting is to provide financial information that is useful to users. Why useful to users? Kasi it will help them in making decisions relating to providing resources to the entity. Magpo-provide ba ako ng resources sa entity na to or hindi? So sino ba yung mga users na nagpo-provide ng resources sa entity? Sila yung mga investors tsaka yung creditors. Sila yung nag-e-invest or sila yung nagpapautang sa entity. So ngayon, yung information from the financial reports, ginagamit nila yon to assess kung mag-i-invest pa ba sila or magpapautang pa ba sila sa entity. So, titingnan nila ngayon yung financial statements na entity. Okay, maganda ba yung financial position na entity? Maganda ba yung income niya? Okay lang ba yung cash flow niya? Tapos, pag tinignan yun, pag in-assess yun ni investor tsaka ni creditor, it will help them to decide kung mag-i-invest ba siya sa entity na yun, kung magpapautang ba siya ng malaki sa entity na yun. And we have also other parties or secondary users of financial statements. Ginagamit din ni government, ni customers, ni public, tsaka ni employees yung financial reports. And it is also useful to them. So, ginagamit ni government yung financial reports in allocating resources, activities of the entity, and for regulation purposes also and taxation policies. So, ginagamit nila yung financial reports sa pagtatax ng entity, lalo na yung income statement. So, ano bang gagamitin para malaman kung magkano na ang tax na entity? Malamang yung income statement niya. And at the same time, yung regulation. Ginagamit ni government yung financial reports from the entity to know kung nagko-comply ba si entity sa regulations ni government. Customers, ginagamit ni customers yung financial reports or the financial statements in assessing kung magpapatuloy ba si entity na ito or hindi. Si public naman, the information needs ni public from the financial reports is the trend and the recent developments or range of activities of the entity. For example, si company na to, ano bang new products niya, ano bang development ng entity na ito. Si employees, ginagamit niya naman yung information from the financial reports in knowing the stability and profitability. Kaya pa ba akong sweldohan nito? Pwede ba akong mag-apply dito? So, the remuneration packages and other benefit na pwede ma-offer na entity. So, lahat yun makikita ni employee sa financial reports na entity. But the primary users of the general purpose financial statements are the present and potential investors and the lenders and other creditors. Kasi sila talaga yung concern sa financial statements ni entity. Kasi magpo-provide sila ng resources magbibigay sila ng pera sa entity. So therefore, kailangan nila yung mga information from that reports in making decisions. Qualitative characteristics of financial reports. So the qualitative characteristics of financial reports make the financial information most useful to users in making decisions. We have fundamental qualitative characteristics and enhancing qualitative characteristics. From the word fundamental, if the financial information is relevant and faithfully represented, meaning it is useful to the users. And the financial information is enhanced if it is comparable, understandable, timely, and verifiable. Fundamental qualitative characteristics. So again, we have two fundamental qualitative characteristics, relevance and faithful representation. So for the relevance, we can say that the financial information is relevant when it is capable of making a difference in the decisions made by users. So kailan natin masasabi that it is capable of making a difference in the decisions made by user? Okay, masasabi natin na capable siya of making a difference if it has the predictive value and confirmatory value. Ano yung predictive value? So, predictive value, it can be used as input to processes employed by users to predict. From the word predictive, it is used to predict future outcomes. For example, yung financial information about sa revenue ng company this year. Yung revenue this year or yung income ng company this year, pwedeng gamitin yun to predict the future revenue of the company. So therefore, meron siyang predictive value. Confirmatory value. Pag sinabing confirmatory value, it provides feedback about previous evaluation. So, from the word confirmatory, kino-confirm nyo yung past evaluation or yung previous evaluation. For example, dun sa revenue, dun sa income. For example, meron ng past evaluation, past prediction ng revenue for the past years, kino-confirm ng income ngayon na year, ng actual income, kung tama ba yung prediction last year, or that the result of those comparisons can help them to improve their processes in predicting or in forecasting financial information. Meron tayong tinatawag na materiality naman. When I say materiality, it is an entity aspect of relevance. Kasi may mga items na relevant sa ibang kumpanya pero hindi relevant sa ibang company. Okay? Because materiality, the concept of materiality is not an absolute materiality but a relative materiality. Meaning, for example, yung 1,000 pesos sa isang company, sa isang maliit na company, material na sa kanila, malaking halaga, significant. Pero yung 1,000 pesos sa large companies, immaterial lang yan, insignificant lang yan. So therefore, we both consider the nature and the amount of the item when considering the materiality. So, materiality is an entity aspect of relevance based on the nature. Nature, tinitingnan yung nature or magnitude or both of the items to which the information relates in the context of an individual entity's financial report. Another fundamental qualitative characteristic is faithful representation. Faithful representation means the financial report must faithfully represent the phenomena it purports to represent. Faithful representation seeks to maximize the following underlying characteristics of completeness, neutrality, and freedom from error. When we say completeness, there is full adequate disclosure of the items that are recorded in the books of the corporation. So, lahat dapat ng transactions, events na naka-record sa book ni corporation dapat naka-disclose either on the face of the financial statements or in the notes to the financial statements. Neutrality. Neutrality means it is free from bias or supported by the exercise of prudence. Ibig sabihin, hindi manipulated yung amounts or yung nakalagay sa financial statements. For example, may mga ibang companies na minsan pinapataasan nila yung income na nakareport sa financial statements para mas maraming mag-invest sa kanila or mas gumanda yung image nila. May mga companies naman na manipulate nila yung report sa financial statements nila, sa income statement nila, pinapababaan nila para mas bumaba yung taxes na binabayaran nila sa BIR. Freedom from error means no errors or omission. Ibig sabihin, lahat ng dapat ma-record na record, lahat ng dapat ma-report na report, walang omission. No errors, ibig sabihin, lahat ng naka-record dapat tama, lahat ng naka-record dapat accountable sa entity. Ibig sabihin, pag nag-report ng asset sa entity, dapat yung asset na yan pagmamay-ari ng entity. Kapag nag-report ng income sa entity, dapat ang income na yan na-earn ni entity. Kapag nag-report ng expenses sa entity, dapat yung expense na yan is na-incurred ni entity. So, no errors or omissions. For example, merong 10,000 na cash na pumasok sa entity and then na-record siya ni entity 100,000. So, mali na yun. Sobra ng 90,000, overstated yung cash ni entity. Therefore, it is not free from error. Therefore, it is not faithfully represented. So, these three are important para malaman natin if the financial report is faithfully represented. Enhancing qualitative characteristics. Remember that fundamental qualitative characteristics makes the financial information useful. But the enhancing qualitative characteristics enhance only the financial information. We have four enhancing qualitative characteristics: comparability, understandability, timeliness, and verifiability. Comparability and understandability, we will discuss this later. When we say timeliness means information is available to decision makers in time to be capable of influencing their decisions. Sa tingin nyo ba, yung information from 2005, pag in-issue siya ngayon na year, magkakaroon pa ba siya ng influence or impact sa decision ng users ng financial statements? Wala na. So, timeliness is very important in considering when to issue the financial reports. For example, the financial information in 2005 was issued in year 2019. So the financial reports that was issued in year 2019 is not capable of influencing the decisions of the users of financial statements. Hindi na siya relevant kasi matagal na masyado yung financial information. Tapos na, may decision na nangyari from 2005 or 2006. Another enhancing qualitative characteristics is verifiability. Verifiability means different knowledgeable and independent observers could reach consensus, meaning the same interpretation, the same results. For example, different observer, the same sila, direct observation, the same amount, the same interpretation for the same financial reports issued by the company. Or for example, nirecalculate nila yung expenses ni company A. Nung nirecalculate siya ng isang observer, yung result ng recalculation niya is the same with the result of the recalculation of another observer, then there is a consensus. Therefore, the amounts contained in the financial statements is verifiable. So, therefore, pag merong verifiability, there is depiction that faithfully represented or hindi ka-question yung mga amounts na nakapresent sa financial statements. Another example, pag rene-compute yung inventory ni company, the same method ang ginamit ng different observer and they come up with the same result. Therefore, they reach consensus. Therefore, the financial statements are verifiable. The information are verifiable. So that is timeliness and verifiability. Now let's discuss comparability and understandability. When we say comparability, it enables users to identify and understand similarities and differences among items with information about what? So we have two comparability, the enter comparability and intra comparability. Enter comparability is also known as vertical comparability, while intra comparability is also called horizontal comparability. Enter comparability means you are comparing two or more entities, different entities. For example, you are comparing the financial position for the year 2020 of Corporation A and Corporation B. So, magkaibang entity yon. So, that is enter comparability. While sa intra comparability naman, you are comparing the same entity for another period or date. For example, Corporation A. Kino-compare mo yung financial statements ni Corporation A for the year 2019 and his financial statement for the year 2020. The same entity but between two different periods, year 2019 and year 2020. That is the intra comparability. If the financial statements is comparable, it will enhance the financial information. Kasi makakaapekto yun sa pag-decide ng mga users of financial reports. Understandability is achieved if information is clearly and concisely letter A classified, letter B characterized, letter C presented. For example, if Corporation A buy goods para ibenta, that goods should be classified as inventory. Kasi in-inventory natin yung mga goods na binibenta natin. So that goods should be classified as inventory. And that goods should be characterized as an asset of the entity and should be presented in the statement of financial position and classified as current assets. We will discuss this deeper on the next lecture on the discussion of Philippine Accounting Standard 1, the presentation of financial statements about the proper line item and the current and non-current category and the statement of financial position. Note that financial reports are prepared for users who have a reasonable knowledge of business and economic activities and who review and analyze the information with diligence. So, hindi natin pwedeng i-expect na magiging understandable lang yung financial reports kapag naintindihan siya ng lahat. No. Because financial reports are prepared only for users who have reasonable knowledge. Ibig sabihin, merong basic knowledge, merong reasonable knowledge of business, merong background sa business or merong background sa accounting para maintindihan niya yung financial statements. So, pag naintindihan nyo ng users na merong reasonable knowledge of business and economic activities, then that financial report is understandable. Remember, we have 4 enhancing qualitative characteristics, CUTV, comparability, understandability, timeliness, and verifiability. And we have 2 fundamental qualitative characteristics, faithful representation, and relevance. Note that enhancing qualitative characteristics is used only to enhance the financial information but not to make the financial information useful. So enhancing qualitative characteristics should be maximized However, it cannot render the information useful if that information is irrelevant or not represented faithfully. So, kahit nag-e-exist si CUTV sa Enhancing Qualitative Characteristics pero walang fundamental qualitative characteristics yung financial reports, yung financial information is useless. Again, the fundamental qualitative characteristics makes the information useful kasi faithfully represented siya and then relevant siya. Kahit gaano pa ka-comparable, gaano pa ka-timely yung reporting, gaano pa ka-verifiable yung reporting or understandable yung presentation ng financial statements, pero hindi siya faithfully represented kasi merong error, merong bias, merong omission, and hindi siya relevant, magiging useless pa rin yung financial reports. Cost constraint on useful financial reporting. Cost is a pervasive constraint on the information that can be provided by general-purpose financial reporting. Kasi baka may mga information na hindi na mapoprovide sa general-purpose financial reporting kasi nga malaki ang may incur na cost and saka yung benefit hindi naman masyadong useful. Note that cost should be justified by the benefits of reporting. So that's why the entity should always analyze if the benefits that could be obtained from the financial information will exceed the cost that will be incurred in providing that financial information. Providers of financial information or the companies spend money in collecting, processing, verifying, and disseminating financial statements, financial information, or financial reports. So, it involves money. Ngayon, kailangan i-analyze ni company kung justifiable ba yung cost na yon. At magja-justify lang yun once na ang benefits from that financial information will exceed the cost. So, this is one of the constraints on useful financial reporting. Kasi may mga information na minsan hindi na nada-disclose or hindi na nare-report kasi nga merong cost constraint. Yung benefit is mas maliit kaysa dun sa cost na may incurred pag na-report yung information na yun. Underlying assumption. The framework states that the going concern assumption is an underlying assumption. Pag nagpe-prepare ng financial statements, kino-consider natin yung going concern assumption. The financial statements are normally prepared on the assumption that an entity is going concern and will continue in operation for a foreseeable future, meaning the financial statement presume that an entity will continue in operation indefinitely. Meaning, hindi natin ina-assume na magle-liquidate, mababankrupt si entity, unless na lang kung nag-i-exist na yung ganong situation. For example, nag-declare na ng bankruptcy si company or nag-decide na yung management na mag-liquidate next year. Ibig sabihin, we cannot assume anymore that the company will continue in operation indefinitely. Therefore, we will now prepare the financial statements under different bases and not ongoing concern assumption. Let's talk about the elements of financial statements. Elements of financial statements. We have 5 elements of financial statements. Income, assets, liabilities, equity, and expenses. So, assets, liabilities, and equity are presented in the statement of financial position, while income and expenses are presented in the statement of comprehensive income or the income statement. Elements of financial statements. Again, assets, liabilities, and equity are directly related to statement of financial position, while income and expenses are directly related to performance. So what are assets? Assets are resource controlled by the entity as a result of past events, and from which future economic benefits are expected to flow to the entity. Example: cash, inventory, land, property, machine, and other properties. Example: Company A purchased a machine from Company B. Ngayon, yung machine is controlled already by Company A. So it is a result controlled by the entity as a result of past event. Ano yung past event? Bumili si Company A kay Company B. Merong transaction na nangyari. And from which future economic benefits are expected to flow to the entity. Meron bang benefits from the machine? Yes, meron. For example, in our illustration, if Company A will use that machine to produce their products, then we have a future economic benefits in using the machine. Therefore, that machine should be classified as an asset. Next, liabilities. Liabilities, a present obligation of the entity arising from past events, the settlement of which is expected to result in an outflow from the entity of resources embodying economic benefits. So there is a present obligation, not a future obligation, but a present obligation. For example, may kontrata na, nakakontract na yung pag-purchase ni Company A ng goods kay supplier. Meron ka ng present obligation kasi bawal ka nang umayaw. Arising from past events. Ano yung past event? Yung transaction ni Company A tsaka ni supplier. The settlement of which is expected to result in an outflow from the entity of resources embodying economic benefits. Ngayon, masisettle lang yung obligation mo kay supplier kapag nagbayad ka kay supplier. Therefore, there would be an outflow from the entity of resources embodying economic benefits. So, therefore, that is a liability. Again, there should be a present obligation, a past event, and settlement of which is expected to result in an outflow from the entity of resources embodying economic benefits. Kung sa Tagalog pa, liabilities means utang. Utang na entity sa supplier, utang na entity sa government, or utang na entity from any other entities. Equity. Equity, ito naman yung residual interest in the asset of the entity after deducting all its liabilities. Assets minus liability equals equity. Next, directly related to performance. Income increases in equity other than those relating to contributions from equity participants. So other than those investments contributed by the owners. Increases in equity means ito yung revenue, ito yung sales na pumapasok sa entity. So, income encompasses both revenue and gain. Magkaiba ba si revenue and gain? Oo. Si revenue, ito yung increases in equity from the normal operating cycle. While gain, ito yung from incidental operation. For example, si Company A, involved siya sa buy and sell ng mga cars. Buying and selling of cars. So ngayon, pag nakabenta siya ng car, recognize nyo yun as sales revenue. So that is revenue. On the other hand, si Company A, meron siyang lumang machine na hindi na ginagamit, na matagal na hindi nagamit. So, binenta niya. Ngayon, nung binenta niya yun, nagka-gain siya. Merong inflow. Merong pumasok kay Company A. Yung income na yon should be recognized as gain and not as revenue because that is only incidental to the operation of Company A, and it is not really the business of Company A because again, sa illustration natin, yung business ni Company A, buying and selling ng cars. So again, income encompasses both revenue and gain. Expenses. Decreases in economic benefits from incidental, peripheral transactions other than distributions to equity participants. So other than those distribution at those withdrawal or equity distribution to participants. So decreases in economic benefits, those costs na na-incur na entity. Examples of expense: rent expense, interest expense, water bills, electricity bills. So those are examples of expenses. Recognition and the recognition. Recognition, the process of incorporating in the balance sheet or income statement an item that meets the definition of an element and satisfies both the two criteria for recognition na i-discuss natin later. So, it is recognizing yung elements of financial statement. So, kung na-meet the assets, liabilities, equity, and expense, yung definition na sinet ni conceptual framework, therefore, kailangan natin silang i-recognize sa financial statements. The recognition, on the other hand, is the removal of all or part of a recognized asset or liability from the entity statement of financial position. Example, inventory. The inventory of worth 10,000 is nasa financial statements ni company. Ngayon, pag binenta nyo yun, dapat tinanggal na yun sa balance sheet or sa statement of financial position. Hindi pwede na nabenta mo na pero nandun pa rin sa statement of financial position mo. Another example, liability. Hindi pwede na may nakadisclose na liability sa statement of financial position, may utang ka na 10,000 pero yung utang mo na yan is nabayaran mo na pala. So, kailangan kung nabayaran mo na yan, i-recognize na natin yan. So, i-recognize those assets na nabenta na or kaya fully depreciated na. Meaning, wala na siyang value. So, kailangan i-recognize na siya. I-remove na siya of all or part of a recognized asset or liability. So, what are the two recognition criteria na mention dito sa recognition? The criteria for recognition are letter A and letter B. It is probable that any future economic benefit associated with the item will flow to merong inflow or from the entity, merong outflow. Probable na merong inflow kung asset yan or income yan, or probable na merong outflow kung liability or expense yan. Letter B, the item's cost or value can be measured with reliability. Ibig sabihin, ma-measure natin or ma-estimate natin yung amount ng elements of financial statements. Kasi kung hindi natin alam yung amounts, ano i-record natin sa books ni company? So again, the criteria for recognition, it must be probable and measurable. Methods of recognizing expense. So we have four. Letter A, matching principle, involves the simultaneous recognition of revenues and expenses. Ibig sabihin, simultaneously na-recognize sa revenue and expense. Example, Company A sold goods. Binenta niya sa inventory. So, pag binenta sa inventory, magre-recognize ng sales kasi nakabenta. And at the same time, kailangan i-recognize si cost of goods sold, nung cost nung binenta natin. And that is classified as an expense. So, there is a simultaneous recognition of revenue and expense. Letter B, the systematic and rational allocation. Example, the recording of depreciation expense. Systematic and rational allocation, it means expenses are recognized in the accounting period in which the economic benefits associated with the assets are consumed or expired. Example natin, depreciation. Dine-depreciate natin yung assets. For example, yung assets, yung machine na worth 120,000. Then useful life niya is 2 years. So, therefore, every year, nade-depreciate yung value ni asset ng 5,000. So, since 120,000 siya, divided by 24 months, bakit 24 months? So, pag nag-compute tayo ng depreciation expense using straight line method, pag nag-compute ng depreciation expense, meaning kasi ng depreciation expense, bumababa yung value ng asset. It is the benefit consumed by the asset. So, habang kinokonsume natin yung benefits from the machine, bumababa yung value niya, part ng cost ng asset is nire-recognize natin as expense na. So, for example, may machine tayo na 120,000, useful life niya, magagamit lang siya for 2 years. So, yung useful life na 2 years, so 120,000 na amount divided by 2 years or 24 months, every month, nagde-depreciate yung value niya ng 5,000. And 5,000, yung 5,000 na yun, nare-recognize natin as expense. So, part ng cost ng asset is nako-consume natin kasi ginagamit yung machine. So, every month, yung nako-consume natin is 5,000. So, there is systematic and rational allocation and recording the depreciation expense. So, that is the best example for letter B. Next, letter C, immediate recognition. So, when expenditure produce no future economic benefits, wala namang benefit na napoproduce, or when expenditures do not qualify for recognition in the statement of financial position. Example, electricity bills or water bills. Tapos na, 'di ba? Tapos na nagamit, na-consume na yung kuryente before ka binigyan ng bill. Wala na future economic benefits doon. So, pagbayad natin ng bill, kaya pagka-incur natin nun, diretso na recognize as expense, electricity expense or utilities expense, diretso recognize as expense because it produces no future economic benefits, and at the same time, the expenditure do not qualify for recognition in the statement of financial position. Ano lang ba yung nare-recognize natin sa statement of financial position? Asset, tsaka liability and equity. Kung hindi siya ma-recognize as asset or liability or equity, then diretso natin i-recognize as expense. Letter D, non-matching principle occurs in those cases when a liability under product warranty arises. So, ano yung product warranty? Di ba minsan pag bumibili tayo, merong after sale na warranty services na ino-offer sila. So, usually niyan, nagre-recognize si entity ng liability and at the same time, expense. So, walang inflow, walang outflow si company, walang outflow si entities. So, ngayon, yung nag-offer ng warranty services, meron siyang liability at the point of sale kasi in-offer niya na yung services niya. Anytime, pwedeng bumalik si customer tsaka ipa-repair niya yung item na binili niya from the entity. So, therefore, kailangan mag-recognize ng liability ni entity. Sa pag-recognize siya ng liability, magre-recognize din siya ng expense. So, recognizing expense and a liability at the same time. Pero we are recognizing expense dito without an outflow of cash. Hindi naman tayo nagpapalabas ng cash dito. We're only offering our service, future service to the customer. So, non-matching principle, hindi nagmamatch. Wala rin namang revenue na involved. So, walang matching of revenue and expense. The recognition, as we have discussed kanina, normally occurs for an asset when the entity loses control of all or part of the recognized asset. Kailan ba tayo mawawalan ng control? Pag nabenta na natin or kaya na-expire na or na-consume na yung asset. So, kailangan i-recognize, tanggalin na siya sa statement of financial position. Letter B, for a liability, the recognition normally occurs when the entity no longer has a present obligation for all or part of the recognized liability. Kailan ba mawawala yung present obligation natin pag na-settle na natin si liability. So, once nabayaran na yung liability, kailangan i-recognize na siya sa statement of financial position. Nasa statement of financial position kasi yung asset, liability, and equity. So, ibig sabihin, pag nabenta na si asset, pag na-expire na si asset, tanggalin mo na doon. Si liability naman, pag nabayaran mo na siya, ibig sabihin, hindi mo na kailangan i-disclose si liability doon. Measurement of the elements of the financial statements involves assigning monetary amounts at which the elements of the financial statements are to be recognized and reported. So the conceptual framework acknowledges that a variety of measurement bases are used today to different degrees and in varying combination in financial statements, including historical cost, current cost, net realizable value, and present value. Historical cost is the most commonly used. Actually, this historical cost is the transaction price or the purchase price that give rise to the item being measured. So, for example, sa asset, nag-purchase si company ng machine last year worth 10,000. That 10,000 is the historical cost of the machine. Letter B, the current cost. What is the current cost? Current cost reflects the current amount that would be paid to acquire an equivalent asset or receive to take an equivalent liability. For example, sa illustration natin kanina, yung machine. Yung machine na purchase natin last year, kung bibili ba tayo ngayon na year, magkano ba yung machine na yun? Equivalent asset. If we are to acquire an equivalent asset, how much we will pay? So that is the current cost. Or in terms of liability, how much will we receive to take an equivalent liability? For example, may liability tayo last year. Kung mangungutang ba ako this year, magkano ba marireceive ko pang mangungutang ako ng ganon? Okay? So, the current cost. Yung cost niya ngayon, the current price. Letter C, the net realizable value. So, the net realizable value, eto naman yung kung ibebenta ko po yung machine, for example, dun sa illustration natin, if I will to sell this machine, hanggang anong amount ko to pwedeng ibenta. So, the net realizable value is the cash or cash equivalents that can currently be obtained by selling the assets in an orderly disposal. Again, dun sa illustration natin, yung historical cost, yung transaction price, yung 10,000. Binili mo yung machine worth 10,000. Yung current cost, kung bibilhin ko yung the same machine ngayon, magkano yun? That is the current cost. Yung net realizable value naman, kung ibebenta ko yung machine na binili ko last year, magkano yung marirealize ko? Magkano yung matatanggap ko? That is the net realizable value. Yung letter D naman, the present value. Usually, liabilities use present value as the measurement basis. This is the discounted value, meaning yung future economic benefits or your future economic outflow from the entity or to the entity, outflow or inflow to or from the entity. So, present value, yun, i-discount yun. That is the present value. Present value is the future net cash flows discounted. Discounted value of the future net cash flows. Diba sabi, yung elements of financial statements, merong probable inflow and outflow sa entity. Future yun. Yung future benefits na inflow, tsaka future benefits na outflow sa entity, lalabas or papasok sa entity, pag discount natin yun yung present value. For example, yung assets, meron tayong future benefit nun na 10,000 per year. Meron 10,000 inflow per year for the next 5 years. Pag discount natin yon, magkano ba yun? Okay? pag present value natin, magkano ba ang value ng 10,000 every year for the next 5 years ngayon? So that is the present value. We will discuss this present value deeper pagdating sa intermediate accounting 1. Concepts of capital and capital maintenance. We have financial concept. Profit is the difference between the net assets end and the net assets beginning after excluding any distributions to and contributions from owner during the period. We also have the physical concept, wherein profit is the difference between the physical productive capacity end and the physical productive capacity beginning after excluding any distributions to and contributions from owner during the period. Note that under the financial concept, the difference between the net asset end and the net asset beginning after excluding any distribution to and contributions from owners. Distribution to yung withdrawal or contributions from owner yung additional investment from the owner. Kasi in general sense, once yung capital beginning tsaka capital end is the same lang, after excluding the distribution contribution, ibig sabihin na-maintain mo lang yung capital. Pero once nag-exceed na yung capital end sa capital beginning, meaning meron ng profit. Or kaya pag bumaba yung capital end sa capital beginning, meaning meron tayong loss. Pero note na dapat after excluding any distribution kasi baka bumaba lang kasi nag-withdraw or kaya baka tumaas lang kasi merong additional investment. So note na may profit lang kapag kinonsider natin, tinanggal muna natin yung distributions to and contributions from owners. Ano nga bang pinagbago sa net assets beginning and end after excluding the distribution and contribution? May pinagbago ba or na-maintain lang? Okay, the same with the physical concept. Yung physical concept lang is more sa productive capacity. For example, at the beginning, yung productive capacity lang is 100,000. Pero pagka end of the year, naging 150,000. So therefore, merong profit. Yun yung magiging basehan. Under financial concept naman, titingnan yung net assets. So yung net assets natin, again, paano i-compute sa net assets? Asset minus liability. Kung yung net asset natin sa beginning of the year is 50,000 pesos, then yung net assets natin at the end of the year is 100,000 pesos, excluding na yan the distribution and contribution from owners, then ibig sabihin, meron tayong profit na 50,000. Yung physical concept naman is more siya sa productive capacity. Katulad ng example natin kanina, kung yung capacity niya beginning of the year is 100,000 units yung kaya niyang ma-produce, and then at the end of the year, 150,000 units na, then ibig sabihin, ito yung magiging basis na masabi ni entity na meron siyang profit. This is the end of Lecture 1. Thank you. God bless.